Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Chris Rossini, our co-host. Chris, welcome to the program.
Good morning. Great to be with you, Dr. Paul.
Very good. I want to spend a little bit of time on an issue we've talked about before, but it's going to be around for a while yet to come, and that is the issue of the Federal Reserve. Because it is a big deal, and it's been around for over 100 years and it's done a lot of damage. But I want to talk a little bit about it today about it isn't just somebody printing money and pretending they know how much money we should have and what interest rates should be, but there's a lot of problems that are ramifications from the policy, and one is the principle of moral hazard. It causes a lot of mistakes to be made and people react in different manners. And that I think we could probably run up a pretty good list, but we will mention a few of those. But we talk about the Fed a lot, and a lot of times, I will mention that I have met economists in the Federal Reserve and around, and people in Congress, and they're very sincere in that. They're not doing this to help any special interests, and they're academically attuned to the fact that it's a sound economic system. We had all these problems in the 19th century. We needed the Fed to iron things out, and therefore they support it on principle. There's a lot of people that exist that way. But then there's the other group that will argue, and I share this view as well, and that is, it is an economic issue, and some people really believe it, but there's also some self-serving interests involved in controlling the money issue, since that inclination has existed throughout all history. Even when precious metals were used, it was always controlled by the government, and there was debasement of currencies, and they always manipulated. So there was always this temptation to serve special interests, and most of the time throughout history, it's been used to serve the government, because the government needs some money, and they can tax, but then when they can't get enough taxes and they still want to do more stuff and they want to expand their empires, the tendency then would be to debase the currency, an old-fashioned way of inflating. So there's been a special interest involved, and there's also been those individuals at the universities. And sometimes I think the people at the universities are there for two reasons. One, they make money by providing the ammunition for the Fed, to continue. And they also are the ones who write the papers to justify academically, what the Fed is doing. So some of that can be mischief, and some of it is just plain out of ignorance, and they know exactly what they're doing. But that involves to know exactly how much of each we're getting means that we would have to look into the motivations at all. And I think we have to keep an open mind about the motivations. But that is not the whole issue that we want to talk about today. Today, Chris, I want to talk more about the ramifications of a policy like this, and what are the hazards, a thing they refer to as moral hazards, getting people to do things they wouldn't have done otherwise. And I would say that we didn't sit down before the program and make a list, but I bet we can come up with a few things that are moral hazards caused by this monetary system and precisely by the Federal Reserve.
Yes, Dr. Paul, the Fed, it corrupts society from top to bottom, just its mere existence and what it does. And we talk a lot on this show about how they affect us. They create these artificial booms in the economy, which have to be followed by very bad and tough busts. We're in a boom right now, and we're going to hit another bust at some time in the future. And so we know that they mess us up. But they also mess themselves up, you see, because they make loans. That's how they make money, on interest, and they make loans every day. And they can make risky loans, they can make good loans, and when they profit, they profit. They get the profits. But when they lose, they are guaranteed to be bailed out by the taxpayers. We went through it in 2009. They got bailed out. All their bad bets that they made, they weren't punished. Some firms were punished, but the major big firms, which is who the Fed is there for, are still around, and they are for sure counting on another bailout sometime in the future. So that messes them up individually. Their mentality is all screwed up morally. The decision making that they make, knowing that even when they screw up, the taxpayers will make them whole. So not only do they corrupt society, they corrupt themselves as well.
Right, and I think some of them would even admit this, even the one who are really in deep on policy making and know about it. Yeah, that's right, but we know how to handle this. You know, if it comes up short and the interest in the market is not giving the right rate of interest to have economic growth, well, we'll adjust it because we know better than what the market will say. And then if we run into trouble that we come up with a cash shortage and the corporations and the banks are in need, well, the Fed is there. This is a good thing. They get to print the money and create more credit and do the bailouts without thinking about, well, they've caused a lot of trouble. Just think what would happen if they discover that it's the Federal Reserve that causes all the bubbles and all the depressions and recessions and the inflations that we have to put up with. Oh, no, we can handle that. We are smart enough and we can micromanage interest rates and price increases. And they come up with all these schemes. Like right now, the scheme is that they're managing it quite well. The economy is growing and there is no inflation. We need a little more inflation, though, so that things don't get ahead of themselves. So they're aiming to get prices going up a little faster as part of this strategy that they have. But they who run the Federal Reserve recognize that these problems do crop up as a consequence of their activities. And one thing that they do is they reassure the individuals, the banks and depositors, well, we'll give them government insurance. We'll give them FDIC and we'll guarantee bailouts and all those guarantees so nobody ever loses except when they lose control. And then somebody loses a job and there's an economic correction, the bubble bursts, prices go up too much. And if it gets way out of whack, then you end up with Venezuela and Zimbabwe. And of course, we had a very, very difficult time in the 70s. So this idea that they're so smart and they can keep tinkering with it and take care of it. Not only do they build into it this insurance if a problem hits, they also have this belief in themselves that, yes, Ron, you're right, there are problems there, but that's why we have regulations, because we can regulate and tell the business people and the mortgage people and what they can do, and so we'll write more regulations. And of course, after the big bubble bursting in 2009, what did they do? They gave much more regulatory power to the Federal Reserve to be right on the job. They can print the money and manipulate interest rates, but if things get out of whack, we need to contain this and watch it. So they know that they are far from perfect, but they have to convince the people they will take care of themselves. And right now, there's a fair amount of complacency. Well, the economy is doing well, and they say there's not that much inflation, so there's nothing to worry about. But then there are others who will look at the hazards that have been developed, the moral hazards that are built into the system. And without going through a whole list, I would say the most important one that will bring this system down is the moral hazard of the easy access to debt. And it's debt all over the place. It's debt, sovereign debt, and that is what exists out there. So when that unwinds, when you're building its pyramid lending, yes, this will stimulate things and things look okay. But when it goes down, it goes in the opposite direction and it shrinks. And there's been no evidence throughout all of history that they can create money and totally ignore the problem of running up too much debt. And I would say if they want to think of one single thing that people should be concerned about, which is the greatest moral hazard, and that is the inducement for individuals, corporations, banks, and governments to not worry about it. Just run up the debt because we, the Federal Reserve, we're smart enough to take care of it. We'll regulate it. We'll keep an eye on it. And we know how to print money, and we can, if necessary, if we really come up with a shortage, we'll drop dollar bills out of helicopters. That's how silly it gets. But But no, there's a lot of moral hazard out there, and people should be aware of it. And yet I think that, the government statistics look so good, and they sound good when you hear them, recited. But I think there's a significant number of people. There wouldn't be so much unhappiness for economic matters if there weren't so many people who are falling through the cracks, but nobody notices it.
Right, Dr. Paul. And just as the next point I wanted to make was to talk about the warfare state in the empire. Just as the banks they know that they're going to get bailed out, it's the same thing with the military-industrial complex. It doesn't matter how many war failures they rack up, and they've racked up a lot of them. It's just you go from one country to the next, and despite the failure, they just move on to the next country. It doesn't matter, because there's no way for the voting public to put a check on them. They can print the money to pay for the wars. We can't. Back when there was sound money, the king would have to go to the population. I want to wage war. I need your money to finance it. They don't do that now. They just do it, and we have no say. And even voting doesn't check them. I mean, we voted for Bush, who wanted a humble foreign policy, and that's the last thing we got from him. Obama, the same thing with rallies and everything. He outbombed Bush. And then Trump was going to be the guy. And look what he just did. The biggest military budget in the history of our country. So their voting doesn't work. There's no way to check them financially. The only thing that's left is for them to go bankrupt on their own, just like every empire before us.
Now, so far, Chris, you and I have talked about the things that can go wrong, and there's a moral hazard. People will do bad things, government grows, and the welfare state gets out of control, and wars are financed this way. But if you start with the issue of money, what is money, where does it come from, where did it originate? And then you look at our system and look at the fiat system now today, which is unique in all of history. The fiat dollar is something that was created out of thin air, and it's a worldwide currency. But if people look at this in a precise way of morality, we have to say that it's immoral and it's counterfeit. People understand what counterfeit is. And they understand also, if you're a good counterfeiter, you might do quite well. We have the machine and nobody can tell, and we can go out and spend until the authorities might not find out what happens, but the people find out because there's too much of that counterfeit money circulating in the community, and then people reject it. So I think it has to start with this whole idea of the immorality of money. And if it's seen as counterfeit, the people should wake up and say, no way. And the natural development of money, which occurred over thousands of years, came about because people didn't want to have direct bartering. They wanted to have something as an exchange and a measurement of value so that they could, communicate without trading cows for horses. And the precious metals have been used. But so we're living in unique times. It has only the significant date for recent monetary history is August 15, 1971, because that was the severing of the last link of that old school that said that money had to have real value. And this is, I think, a better way to look at it. Not just you have to look at the imperfections of a bunch of individuals who think they know what interest rates should be and how much money should be created, how to distribute it, make sure the banks and the big business people get it, make sure the welfare state gets it, make sure the war is financed. But that is something. That is one thing that'll happen. But we have to realize that there's so many shortcomings of this, because eventually people will recognize the fallacies of this, and that's why we've had so many serious downturns. But the last one, of course, is 10 years ago. So people, even the people who would disagree with us on the Federal Reserve, they're not that worried about it. Almost all of them are covering themselves, say, yeah, we will have a recession, we will have, and others will say, yes, we will have a depression. So they're not saying that they have solved the problem, but they never acknowledge. This is the whole thing. There will always be an excuse, but it will never be, the blame will never be placed on the Federal Reserve, the way it's set up, the way they get the counterfeit money, the way the very wealthy benefit from it. This is an issue that I've worked hard with progressive Democrats and other progressive independents, and they will listen to us on occasion, because it's supporting the progressive element of the crony capitalists and the banking system, and it is done in a way that's everybody considers legal and beneficial to the average person. But we're approaching that day where a serious discussion will be absolutely necessary to repair the damage that has been done. And if we think of the countries that are going through it in a terrible way right now, let's hope that never comes to us, but it's conceivable. But it would be so horrible, because the dollar is a universal global economy, a worldwide reserve currency, and the repair work would be unbelievable. And there's no move right now, no serious move on right now in Washington to have a currency that is actually backed by something of real value. The one thing that I can say that is a good move, the Campaign for Liberty now is working diligently on trying to get states to pass legislation, that's happened on a couple occasions, to say that, well, we are passing a law and only gold and silver can be used as legal tender, and you can use the gold and silver as legal tender, and it is money, and it can't be taxed. You know, what kind of weird people are they? Oh, well, they are. They didn't go to public school and they read the Constitution, because the Constitution is clear. And to the states, the direction is to the states, because before the Constitution, the states were the ones, every state was printing their money at their own rate. So no counterfeiting. And this would be a big benefit. Now, I think the most important point to find out how serious the founders of this country believed it. See, they put it in the Constitution, only gold and silver could be legal tender. In 1792, they had the first monetary act, and they had to define the dollar and do some monetary thing. And one was, you can't print, you can't counterfeit government documents, and the penalty would be death if you were caught doing it. So they took this very seriously. Right now, it's you're more likely to be arrested if you refuse, if you wanted to pay your bills with gold and silver coins, stamp United States government legal tender, because they don't like that either.
Right, Dr. Paul. I'll finish by saying that it's going to be ultimately someday poetic, because moral corruption is going to ultimately take them down. You can see politically how the desires for more and more crazy things. I mean, we could take some of the democratic socialists. We have the biggest debt in the history of the world, and they want to give free medical care, free health care, free everything, free college, and they have this MMT that they're using, Green New Deal. And even the Fed is saying, whoa, 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 we have a system here. We don't want to burn the whole thing down with these ideas. So ultimately, they're getting so far away from reality that there will be a comeuppance. And what we hope for, and the ideas that we hold and want to share for sound, get rid of this moral hazard and definitely get government away from anything to do with money.
Very good. And I'd like to finish by following up a little bit about the way the Fed was started and the people who run the Fed. Is it based on total economic ignorance? And I concede that there are some there that really believe this, and they don't shovel the money into their pockets, and they don't get direct benefit. But then there are others that are evil, and they're financing their system, whether it's the banking system or the welfare system or the military-industrial complex, and financing wars. There's a lot of that. But if you look at the origination of the Federal Reserve, it was people that wanted to protect the banks. The Fed was to be the lender of last resort. Well, if they're the lender of last resort, that means they have to print a lot of money, because there'll be a lot of people needing this money. So I think it's a combination of the two. Now, the things that we talk about here today and all that's going on has motivated me for a long time. Matter of fact, it was in part of my first time I ran for Congress in 1976. And that is, find out more about the Fed. We need to know what they're doing. Expose the Fed. People aren't ready to say, get rid of the Fed. But I'll tell you what, if we had a true exposure of the Fed and we had an audit of the Fed, and that's something Campaign for Liberty has been working on for a long time, and we've gotten support from the people put enough pressure on members of Congress where when it came up to the House, we had all the Republicans vote for it, plus a lot of the Democrats. So openness and saying we need to know what the Fed is doing. Very, very popular issue. Even though it never got past the Senate, even though if it did, I'm sure a president wouldn't allow it, because that's a big deal. But that doesn't mean that we should light up on this, because we have to emphasize the fact that we need to know more about the Fed. So we should, in the meantime, before we're going to have the market take over and demand that we use sound money, I think in the meantime we'll say, well, we want to get rid of the secrecy. It's time we allow the people of this country and the Congress to know exactly what they're doing. I think that would be a big step in the right direction for sound money and sorting out these many problems that we have. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.